Hello and welcome to Dialogue. China has released a white paper on the Taiwan question and the reunification of China in a new era, reaffirming the fact and the status quo that Taiwan is part of China and demonstrates China's firm will and determination in pursuing national reunification. So what are the highlights of the white paper? How does the public in Taiwan feel about the current cross-strait relations and the U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan? And how might tensions across the strait impact Taiwan's economy in the short term and into the future? To find out more, I'm glad to be joined today by Yang Xiyu, Senior Fellow at the China Institute of International Studies, Digby Ren, political analyst and visiting international relations scholar at Deakin University, Australia, and Andy Mock, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Xu, I will start with you. China has published, if you include this is the most recent one, 3 documents on Taiwan. Tell us why the necessity for publishing these recent documents on Taiwan.
Well, it's a very key question, especially under the current situation. As you mentioned, the Chinese government has released 3 documents on Taiwan question back in the first one in 1993, and the second is the year of 2000, and the third one is now. If you look at the timing, the first one was issued with the new background, both on the relation across the strait and the new situation after termination of the Cold War era. And the second one was in the background of the new century with a new status quo of the cross-strait relations. And now, obviously, the situation across the strait facing new challenges and new opportunities.
Andy, move to you. What is the message, what are the highlights of this document?
Well, I think this document comes at a very important time, Qingduo. When we look at complex, important international problems, they require an integrated set of policies. They involve diplomacy, information, the military, and economics. So we've seen with this very ill-advised and unfortunate visit to Taiwan by Nancy Pelosi that China immediately responded with military exercises as well as economic steps to communicate its concern and its displeasure with Taiwan. And now we're looking at the third piece of this, the informational aspect. So the release of this white paper, I think, is to communicate very clearly and to emphasize China's position that, of course, Taiwan is an inalienable part of China. China strongly prefers to pursue peaceful methods towards reunification. But, and as we've seen, we have to look at this as a collection of policies that sometimes is called DIME, D-I-M-E, diplomacy, information, military, and economics. That this is a vital piece to China's approach to addressing the Taiwan question.
Digby, if you look at this one China principle, that's the most, the key element of these documents, China stresses very much, which basically said that, there's only one China, Taiwan is a part of China, and the People's Republic of China is the sole legal representative of China. That's the one China principle. If you look at Asian countries or absolute majority of countries in the world, they stick to this one China policy. If you have a foreign relationship with China and you recognize Taiwan is part of China, you don't develop official relationship. If you develop official relationship with Taiwan and then you don't have a relationship with China, is that the case?
Yes, Qinduo, that is the case. I think it's 180 countries in the United Nations absolutely have recognized the One China principle, and that includes the United States, all of the NATO members, Australia and New Zealand, all the powers basically. So the ambiguity in there is the terminology about unofficial relations. So, well, I don't see that there's really, and there hasn't been, a great problem with that. But what has happened, of course, is that the United States, specifically in the Obama era, into Trump and now into Biden, are salami slicing that relationship, that understanding. And they're pushing the boundaries as much as they can. Where this is going to lead is what we're going to talk about tonight, obviously, Qinduo.
Mm-hmm. Well, Xu, if you look at the documents, very important information, let me share with our audience here. Basically, they said, we will work with the greatest sincerity and exert our utmost efforts to achieve peaceful reunification. But we will not renounce the use of force, and we reserve the option of taking all necessary measures. This is to guard against external interference and all separatist activities. In no way does it target our fellow Chinese in Taiwan. Use of force would be the last resort taken under compelling circumstances. Based on these words, would you describe China's policy on the Taiwan question as a continuation, as you said, consistency there is. That is like, okay, military option is not off the table, but China is pursuing peaceful reunification.
Yeah. Actually, it's a really key question. First of all, for Chinese people on both sides of the strait, as you mentioned, the last thought is really the last one. Is really the result when we lost every chances to bring about the peaceful unification, and then we have to go to the last resort. But before that, as you mentioned, we will try every effort for peaceful unification, simply because the status quo, the reality of the separation of the mainland Taiwan stemmed from an unfinished civil war. That is the fact. And now the Chinese government, the Chinese people really want to choose the other way to reunification rather than continue to the civil war. However, if we fail to seek for the peaceful unification way, if the other side of the authorities continue to insist on the separatism, that will mean the civil war will be revoked, will be restarted. So that will be the disaster, first of all, for Chinese people, especially given the current situation. We have seen that the United States consider Taiwan as not as an international justice matter, but as a matter of geopolitical politics. And the U.S. regard the Taiwan as a very important strategic spot against China. So when the external forces influences on Taiwan increasing, our concerns is increasing. So with the external interference risks rising, we have to make preparations for both kind of means, peaceful or the last result, say the non-peaceful. That is the reality we have to face. We have to prepare. However, the top priority has always been at the peaceful means.
Mm-hmm. Well, Andy, as Xu pointed out, Taiwan is of strategic importance to the United States. One senior official from Pentagon once said in a hearing, basically, the U.S. will never allow reunification to be achieved, even it's a peaceful one, because that means a loss of U.S. basically against U.S. strategic interests over there. So does that explain why China can't afford to let go of the military option?
Well, I think that's certainly one element, Xingduo. But here I want to disagree with what Digby said, that China can exercise patience in resolving the Taiwan question. And I think it is precisely because of recent American behavior that China cannot be patient. And this is exactly what you're alluding to, Tingduo, this geopolitical question, in that the foundation of China-U.S. relations is Taiwan, and the U.S.'s commitment to following the One China policy. And what we've seen over the last few years is a hollowing out, Digby used the term salami slicing, of this policy. And Nancy Pelosi's visit was a big slab or a big chunk of this piece of salami. And I think that this again shows that for the United States, it views this as a geopolitical competition. And viewing the world this way, it cannot allow China to reunify with Taiwan, because in its view, this would then give China a way past the first island chain, and conceivably the U.S. would believe it would be pushed out of the Pacific. So this is a geostrategic question for the United States, as well as an ideology question. Of course, it talks about shared values and these other issues, but I think, again, the core of this is geopolitical, and unfortunately, I think that some sort of forceful action by China in the near future is absolutely necessary. Bismarck said that the great questions can only be settled by blood and iron. And in our world today, especially in the Pacific, there is no greater question than the future of Taiwan.
Mm-hmm. Well, Digby, I want your response. But if you look at Pelosi, when she returned, received an interview, she said that we support the One China policy, but of course many people have doubts about that. And she talked about my visit basically is in line with the U.S. Asia-Pacific strategy, Asia-Pacific policy. Enjoys bipartisan support. Seems like she tries very hard to justify her provocative visit. We know that. Is that the case? And does that also says, even during her visit, she called Taiwan a country. If you look at the upcoming bill in the U.S. Congress, in that bill, or draft, they say, in clear terms, they call Taiwan a country. That's a clear violation of the One China principle.
The U.S. has been, as Andy and I have both said, salami slicing this, the One China principle. There's no doubt about that. But one of the interesting things that Pelosi said when she was in Taiwan, even though she did call it a country, she never actually said that the U.S. would defend Taiwan. What she said was that the U.S. would defend democracy, and they defend it everywhere. And I think this is a very fine point, because as Andy has stated, the base, this is geopolitical, geostrategic. And the US really only has one kind of arrow in its quiver, so to speak. It used to be the greatest economic power, the greatest industrial power, and the greatest military power. Well, it's now no longer the greatest industrial or the greatest economic power. It's only the greatest military power. And therefore, it tends to see the military and the extension of its power across all three oceans in the world as its only solution to every problem. And it's caught in this trap. At the same time, it understands that the base of its military power is the economic vibrancy of the entire globe. I mean, it's still a very large economy, still a very powerful economy. So it can't, on the one hand, say that there's going to be prosperity in East Asia and in Asia, and on the other hand, threaten to destroy the industrial base of Taiwan, for example, in any future conflict. So it's actually, I think the United States is caught in a trap of its own making. The reality is it can only use military force and the sales of arms and so forth, but it really doesn't have much economic wherewithal any longer. And one of the, I suppose you're going to talk about this later, is the fact that reindustrialization, to get their economy back together, which I doubt that's really going to happen, they're going into recession. is going to strip. What they're going to do is they're going to strip the economy of Taiwan, semiconductors and other electronics. They're trying to get them to go back to the United States, and other countries are doing the same thing, Japan and Europe, in a smaller way. But this is going to strip Taiwan's economy, and then what? So then it's less interesting to defend? I mean, this is the conundrum that the Americans face, and I think that even though Andy said blood and iron, I think the Chinese position of patience, making space, is the better alternative, and that the Americans may well trip over their own bombast and this ambiguity that they've created. I think they're going to fall into their own trap.
Let's have a break. We'll continue our discussion right after this. Latest poll in Taiwan show 44.8%, basically 45% of people are very dissatisfied with Tsai Ing-wen's cross-strait policies. And more than 45% think Pelosi's visit to Taiwan will do more harm than good. Do you think this figure representative of the public sentiment in Taiwan?
Yes, I can imagine such statistics really represent the public sentiments simply because Pelosi's visit made trouble, left troubles for Taiwanese people. When trouble when trouble comes, Pelosi's way is that is your trouble. That is your trouble you should make. So that means Pelosi made the trouble, and the Taiwanese should take the consequences. That is why I believe, not only now, but with time going, and the Taiwanese people will feel more and more consequences from the trouble left by Pelosi. That is the truth reflected by the polls you mentioned.
Let's continue with this, the impact on this economic sphere, dig bit here. Taiwan's trade with the mainland and Hong Kong basically account for, I think, more than 42% of its total trade, and its trade with the U.S. only account for 15%. And also they enjoy the largest trade surplus from trading with the mainland. But of course, because of the measures taken by the mainland, basically to prevent or deter any, say, independent or pro-independence movement or separatist movement in the Taiwan authorities over there. Do you see the long-term impact or short-term impact on Taiwan?
The short-term impact, of course, is there's a little bit of pain over the Pelosi visit. But the longer-term pain, medium-term pain, is going back to what I said about the United States trying to reindustrialize, is that this is going
you
to
mentioned an
effectively
interesting point here. You say
Taiwan
the U.S.
high-tech
reindustrialization by basically drawing, sorry to disrupt you, you have this cheap four alliance, basically South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, the U.S. But the U.S. focus is really to rebuild its manufacturing base. We are seeing that basically, if there's a tension, obviously some of the industries in Taiwan will move to the U.S. and the U.S. would welcome that, or they are, maybe that's their plan. Or the factories from South Korea, they are basically either attracted or under pressure to move some of the factoring, the more investment in the U.S. That probably is more impactful on Taiwan economy.
Yes, that's going to have a huge impact on Taiwan's economy. It's basically going to be stripped of its technology and advanced manufacturing at the high end of semiconductors, and it'll still be able to make. Look, there's a huge market for chips. I mean, obviously China is the largest importer of chips in the world, and it's becoming the largest producer of chips in the world. There's the whole a vast array of digitization, Industry 4.0, let's say, and China is really leading on this in the world. So Taiwan is in a very, very strange situation where, as you say, its economy is basically reliant on the mainland, not on the United States. But obviously its status, or what the DPP sees as its status, relies on US interference or support. So economically, I think Taiwan's going to have a very difficult time ahead. China, the mainland, is not going to want to give too much trade to Taiwan, like a complete sort of, and Taiwan wouldn't accept that either. I think they want to have diversified trade, and that seems normal for them. But in the longer run, they're going to have to rely on the most stable economy in the most vibrant economic area in the world, and that's China in Asia. And of course, that spillover is, of course, into Southeast Asia, into East Asia, into Central Asia, and even across to Europe and into Africa and other localities. And if Taiwan is stripped of its advanced manufacturing, that also is going to disappear. So I think this also, at some point, the lobbying power of Taiwan is going to try very, very hard to turn that around inside Washington.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have Xiyu back. Xiyu, you mentioned about the status quo, or what is the status quo and its relationship with the 1992 consensus. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, actually, in my view, both for the U.S. and China and the people from mainland and Taiwan should have a unified consensus definition of the status quo. So what is the status quo? That reflects exactly by the 92 consensus. Say there is one China. That is the fact. However, different people from both sides, I mean mainland Taiwan, at this moment have a different understanding or different explanation. So that is the basic fact. That is the basic consensus. All solutions should be based on the fact and the consensus. If we really want to solve this issue by peaceful means. So that is my basic view. And whenever we break the status quo, then we have to face the risks of conflicts. So whenever U.S. say they oppose any party to change the status quo by unilateral means, firstly, Pelosi should rethink her provocative visit, and the PPP authorities on Taiwan should review their policies, because all efforts they have made is actually, like many people say, slicing the sausage and changing the status quo by gradual way. That is accumulation of the conflicting factors towards conflicts.
Mm-hmm. Coming back to the economic impact here, let's continue. Andy, Lai Zhengyi, chairman of the Taiwan Chamber of Commerce, has voiced concern that saying that if cross-strait tensions heat up and are prolonged, Taiwan will be regarded as, quote, an unsafe and unstable area by foreign investors, who are basically now drawing up exit plans because of the safety concern, obviously. So that will be, say, long-term impact?
Well, I certainly hope there will not be a long-term impact, but certainly in the short term, with all of this uncertainty, it's not surprising at all that businesses are worried and that this affects investor sentiment. But I want to say one thing, Tingdo, to go back to this question of semiconductors. Now, of course, the U.S. is looking through its Chips and Science Act to develop its own capability, and that could marginalize companies like TSMC. But I think there's a couple things to point out here. First of all, the urgency with which the U.S. has passed the Chips and Science Act, I think shows us that they see the writing on the wall in that reunification by peaceful means or otherwise may happen sooner rather than later. The second thing to point out, too, is that you just can't wave a magic wand or throw a bunch of money at semiconductor companies like Intel or Global Foundries and expect them to be able to produce advanced semiconductors. A lot of people in this business say that, why do you think it's all of the most effective, the most efficient fabs producing the highest, the most advanced chips are all in Taiwan, South Korea, China, and Japan? One, of course, is they have a very deep pool not only of engineers but technicians to work at these fabs. And this is a very, very important question. The other question is mindset and values. So all of these countries have something in common, besides that they're home to advanced semiconductor fabs, that they all have a Confucian mindset and a Confucian culture, where the individual is willing to do what it takes to make the collective, whether the collective is your family, a company, or your country, successful. And this is something that is not as widespread in the United States. So I cannot say that people don't think this way, but certainly not as widespread. And these may be the two critical factors that will determine whether the U.S. can indeed build its own semiconductor value chain, especially at the fab end of the value chain, or will the Samsungs, the TSMCs, the SMICs still be globally significant? And history indicates that there is a reason very smart people with a lot of money, including American companies, have chosen to invest and to expand their investments in Asia to make semiconductors.
Well, on that note, we conclude today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.